Meet Eddie, a lovely 10-year-old cob whose owner came to me because he felt stiff and was tripping up with his front feet. He'd not had any physio before, but the tripping improved with regular sessions and some ridden work as well. But we did hit a problem. More issues were developing over time and getting worse, so he was referred to his vets for some scans. And what we found were quite a few different issues. He had navicular in both his front feet, arthritis in his hock, and sacro-iliac dysfunction. For those of you who are unfamiliar with sacro-iliac dysfunction on the sacro-iliac joint, it sits between the ilium of the pelvis, which is the big wings that come up, and the sacral part of the spine. The sacrum is made of 5 fused vertebrae, which sits nestled in between these two wings of the ilium. It articulates with synovial fluid, so much like your knee or your elbow, it has some joint fluid in there. But it does move a little bit differently to those type of joints. It doesn't move through a great range of motion. It uses the muscles of the hind limb to cause tension, and it has more of a sliding, gliding, translational type effect. The close relationship between the muscles of the hind limb, the hamstrings, the glutes, the hip flexors, and the lower back muscles, all feeding into this sacroiliac ligament, means that damage to one affects the other. So, if a horse has a trauma or a fall, they can damage the joint, which can in turn cause muscle weakness or overuse. This leads us on to looking at Eddie's compensations and the issues we were seeing in his gait pattern. So on gait assessment, we could see with Eddie, he doesn't quite push with the hind limbs, so he's lacking hind limb impulsion. On occasion, he would drag his hind limbs as well and be just a bit lethargic in general. You can see it in the walk and the trot. When he was ridden, we also had some different issues. So he was falling in on a circle. In particular, he was difficult to bend to the right and fall in, either when he was going around the corner or just when he was ridden in general out hacking. He would have issues with his canter. He would either go into canter when he wasn't asked, break from canter into trot, or just have difficulty maintaining impulsion and pace in his ridden work. Now, these things didn't just happen overnight, they happen gradually and slowly. And for an owner who's just a bit unaware and who sees their horse every day, it can just seem like they're changing and gradually getting grumpy or changing their habits. Another thing that happened with Eddie in terms of his behaviour was that he was difficult to pick his hind limbs up. When I first started seeing him, this just came down to the point where I thought maybe he's not used to it, he just needs a bit more time, and it was a bit difficult for him. We implemented some stretching and some routine work, and it didn't really get better, it got worse, and over time he got more and more grumpy, and you'll see on the video how it's just takes a few attempts to get the legs off the floor. He seemed quite heavy, and this is a sign that his sacroiliac dysfunction was happening and occurring. So we didn't know this at the time, but we did flag it up afterwards as a behavioural sign that meant that he was actually in more and more discomfort. We saw a lot of his behaviour change once he had come back from the vets. So while he was there, he had some steroid injection which was applied to his sacroiliac joints, and this gave him some pain relief and also some anti-inflammatory effect in that area. Now, this is a really important part of the rehab because having anti-inflammatories and pain relief on board means we have a really good window of opportunity. And we saw during this window a lot of his behavioural things that we'd seen before just melt away and just get much better. So now he's much easier to pick his feet up, and we can actually get on and use this window to start to rehab him properly. As well as this, we made sure to get his tack sorted and checked just in case it was causing him any pain and discomfort as he was doing some long lining work. And also, we addressed his shoes and his foot balance. So, with the diagnosis of his arthritis and his navicular, we made sure to get the farrier on board and give him as much support as he could to make sure his feet were comfortable and safe to start a little bit of work again. Now, sacroiliac joints as a whole can be quite tricky to rehab. So, because of the start, like we mentioned, it has a lot of ligamous attachments. It's not like a normal movable joint, so it doesn't really respond that great to just pure rest. We rested him for a little while to let the inflammation go down, and then we wanted to get him moving and make sure that we built up his muscle mass to help support and stabilise the joint, which is the first part of his rehab plan. The first section is all about stabilising him, making sure he's comfortable, and using that window of opportunity with his pain relief and medication to make sure that we could maximise this time to make sure he was as comfortable as possible. Because it took quite a while for us to get Eddie sorted, he had made some compensations in the meantime. So we found that where he didn't have pain before, he had had some pain. In particular, his hamstrings were really painful and tight, and he'd also started with some back pain as well. His pelvic tilts were also painful, and you'll see on the video he does move away as we're trying to do this and trying to assess what sort of range of motion he has and if he can push up correctly and evenly through both sides. We used massage myofascial release, therapeutic ultrasound, stretching routines, and loads of other things to try and help the compensations that he did have. Once those had started to wear down, we realised he was much more comfortable and able to go into phase 2 of his rehab session. So, this is more strength building where we started to put in long line in hill work and some walk poles just to try and make sure his brain realised he wasn't painful when he was doing some of these movements anymore, because it had been going on for quite a while at this point. By the time you go through the entire referral process, it can take a while. He was also really difficult to diagnose because when he went to the vets, he wasn't showing lameness at all. The adrenaline kicked in, he was in a new environment, and it made it really difficult for the vets to see some of the subtleties in his behaviour and in his movement that we had seen at his home environment. This, coupled with the fact that trying to diagnose and radiograph the SI joint is really difficult because of the pure amount of muscle mass that is covering this area. So we had to go away for a bone scan, which obviously cost a bit more money and took again a little bit more time to get sorted and get the results back for. So all in all, it did take a good few months for us to get to a point where we could comfortably know what we were dealing with, understand why he was showing some of the signs in his ridden work and his behaviour, and just rule some things out, because obviously we can't progress as vet physios if we're not sure on the diagnosis. What I would say is that sacro-iliac dysfunction as a whole can be really tricky to rehab and even tricky to spot in the first place. And there are some common myths and places where people will fall down in this rehab journey and take their foot off the gas and just become a little bit lost and feel like they don't have the support that they need. And I hear this all too often from owners. Now, some people will think that the SI pain must be quite bad and it must show an obvious lameness. Well, most owners, from my experience, really struggle spotting hind limb lameness, and some professionals as well. It can be quite elusive at times. So, to spot a subtle hind limb lameness is even harder. And despite it being quite hard and quite painful for the horse to function with this, most of them, as prey species, just suppress those motions and don't give us many clues at all. So, they can be very subtle, the gait changes you will see. As we've said, x-rays don't always confirm SI pain either because they are such a deep structure, so don't think that just a radiograph is enough. And we mentioned that Eddie had some steroid as well. Now, the injection alone does not fix the problem at all. It takes away the pain and it takes away some of the anti-inflammatory purposes that we need, but it doesn't cure the problem. Okay, so the dysfunction is either caused by a trauma in the first place or by a dysfunction of the hind limb. Eddie's might have been because he had hock arthritis and he was compensating for this as well, but it can be different for every single horse that we see. Sometimes you'll see a hunter's bump on the horse's back, which can give you an indication of dysfunction, but other times it's just these really subtle gait changes that can be really difficult to see. They usually pass off as laziness or just unwilling to go forward or even being naughty at times as well, and they're not, they're all really sweet and generally they want to please us. So, my 3 top tips for trying to deal with SI dysfunction would be: 1, to watch for subtle changes. These can be within the horse's gait, their shoe wear, or changes to their behaviour. If you're unsure, get a vet physio to watch your horse and then just be aware of their strengths and weaknesses after you get the results. The next step would be to advocate for your horse. Even when told there's nothing wrong, the owner of Eddie knew that her horse wasn't quite right and we pushed for answers. And then we got the full problem list. We knew what we were dealing with and we could adapt things much better to try and face some of the demons and some of the scary things that came out of the report. And the last thing would be to don't take your foot off the gas too early in the rehab process. Try and keep maintaining those nice, steady rehab protocols for longer than you think sometimes, because, like I said, horses as prey animals are designed to hide and suppress some of their emotion in terms of pain. And we can sometimes jump on them too early, push them too early, and then fall right back at the start of the rehab process, which can be really demoralising and difficult from an owner's point of view. I'd love to hear more of your journeys, and if you're dealing and rehabbing an SI horse currently, please comment SI below and tell me what stage of the process you're in, maybe what signs you've seen, and just general comments about SI dysfunction to try and spread the word and help other people who are dealing with this situation too. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, subscribe for more stories, and I hope to see you all soon.